All right, my friends. Last time we met asynchronously and talked about Ulysses chapters 4, 5, and 6. Just to quickly reiterate what happens in those, we switched perspectives from the initial part of Ulysses, the Telemachia, and following along our Telemachus-like and Hamlet-like, as it turns out, Stephen Dedalus, to Leopold Bloom, our second main or chief character, not quite protagonist, for our short disposition on Greek words as Greek literary terms. Here we see a small inversion of what Ulysses would be. Keep in mind that though Ulysses is often billed as the very smart Greek or Achaean character who comes up with the help of Athena with the notion of the Trojan horse, which would later become the name for various viruses that are used to infiltrate your computer's operating system. He is also a very physical Greek character. He's very strong. He wins an athletic contest against the Phaeacians. He's known to be a great wrestler, a great discus thrower, a great swimmer, usually a good runner, except for when he's at sea. So not only is he smart, but he's also very strong. He's not only strong, but he's a big eater, but eats those things appropriate to him. He does not eat things banned by the gods, which can end up getting him killed. And he's also somewhat lascivious, lustful. He flirts with a young lady, Nausicaa, and he lays with a sea witch named Circe, meaning that he copulates with her, as well as with a goddess Calypso for 7 years. And so Ulysses is a very full individual, not like what you might consider like a medieval monk who denies the flesh. That is not Ulysses' this idea. Now, the very first thing that we see Leopold Bloom doing should show you the contradictions or the complexities of his character. He is seen as ethnically Jewish, though we know for a fact that he's not, because his mother was in fact not, and Judaism traditionally is matrilineally descended, and he's eating pork kidneys. Pork is prohibited in the Jewish faith, as well as in the Muslim faith. In fact, the Greeks were sort of, they thought, they didn't know whether the Jews were disgusted by, there's an idea from Joseph Campbell, they didn't know whether they were disgusted by pigs or whether they venerated pigs, right? You can see why you avoid eating something because either it's gross or because it's holy. Same sort of thing with the Hindus and cows, for example, though I think that is sort of a veneration. But in any case, Leopold Bloom is not a typical practicing Jewish individual. He has a more complex view of his faith. He's far more contemporary, like people these days. The other thing that he's doing is he is serving his wife food in bed. This is a big inversion. It's not a manly man sort of Ulysses thing to do. Ulysses is himself served by the women in his life, both sexually and edibly in terms of food. Leopold Bloom is far more of a modern individual, inverting the sort of gender relationship. And in fact, you notice that during the course of the day, there is sort of an inversion of the gender relationship. Who is the one who is going to cheat on whom? It is Molly Bloom and her overwhelming sort of sexual appetite that is based on 10 years of sharing a cold bed with her husband that will be consummated today. It is Molly Bloom who gets fed breakfast in bed. It is Molly Bloom that then beds down a suitor. So not only is she not like Penelope in that she is unfaithful to her husband, but she is far more like Ulysses in that she is getting the food and also the sexual gratification that she wants, which her husband is denied. So even in the very first chapter that we see Leopold, our expectations of what he is supposed to be, if our expectations are that he is like Ulysses, Odysseus, this towering hero, are upset in several ways. He will be cheated on. He will not be consummating his sexual appetites with another person, though he will autoerotically deal with himself later, which again, not very Ulyssian. And also, rather than simply feeding himself and his appetites, he feeds another. All right. In any case, chapter 5 is about the Lotus Eaters. It features both a church as well as a Turkish bath and a soap shop. It's filled with sensuous smells and the sorts of things that act something as soporific. Soporific is something that puts you to sleep. If you remember The Wizard of Oz, famous again because of iterations of it, like Wiz and Wicked, Poppies, poppies. Dorothy in the middle of a big field, which supposedly was full of asbestos, actually. Business practices have changed a lot over many years. But these poppies acted as soporific. She falls asleep. And so he thinks while he's at the church, he hears the Latin, he doesn't understand it, but sort of puts his wits to sleep. There are various smells and incense within the church as well. In the soap shop, you've probably been into a Hallmark store before or a candle shop and been overwhelmed by the many smells. And then later he finds himself in a Turkish bath. And notice that Orientalism, Turkish, Eastern, this idea of it being so hot that the people are lazy is something that that Bloom thinks of while he lies in a bath and looks at his recumbent body in front of himself, and then ironically thinks about being the father of thousands, because remember, he is but the father of one. He was the father of two, his daughter Millie, as well as Molly's daughter, a sort of pale reflection of Molly. We'll find out later, seems to have become very, very close to doing something similar to what Molly does during the course of the day with the young suitor who we hear bragging later during the Nighttown episode. But Bloom is ironically the father of thousands, because his son Rudy, there's an impotence to his son Rudy that did come to be, only lasted for 10 days, 10 years ago, and he died. And worse, perhaps, than that is that Bloom has denied his wife his conjugal embrace in the last 10 years, even though ostensibly they could have had another child. And I'm not saying that one replaces the other, but I am saying that sometimes one has to move forward in life. Bloom has been caught in the past, and this is the day when the past really starts to catch up with him. And something I've said to you, but I wish to reiterate to you, because sometimes we live in an eternal present when we're young, as if the world will not change, is that the outcome of one's decisions, particularly negative outcomes, are not always immediate. Sometimes you crack the glass and it is going to shatter, but it doesn't shatter the moment that you crack it. And that can be a problem for humans, because they can continue to act in habitual ways that lead to more and more cracks coming out of the glass, while thinking, well, it hasn't shattered, so this is perfectly fine. That is for example, and just to give a very crude example, that is the sort of perception that somebody who, say, is addicted to drugs must certainly have. Just because I had one drink, just because I had one puff, just because I had one drip, and I'm fine, does not mean that over time these poisons won't take their toll on one. And perhaps this applies not just to physical substances, but to, say, personal interactions or ways of even looking at things as well. Be careful about the habits that you develop, because even 10 years down the line, they may have their denouement. In any case, moving on to 6, we then have our Hades chapter, which features Bloom writing an appearance with several of the sort of minor dignitaries of Irish culture in order to see Paddy Dignam's funeral. Paddy Dignam, who himself seems to have been afflicted with the Irish disease, the Dublin disease of being a wastrel who spent his time drunkenly in pubs, and in fact ends up dying because of alcoholism. He does leave behind a wife and a family, and as we talked about, also a life insurance policy that he took out a loan on that may not have been returned to his family. That said, because he was such a wastrel, he never signed the document entirely, and so his family may still get his life insurance policy based on a technicality if Bloom can work his magic, as it were. The very end of this chapter, something I just want to mention, because something you may want to reflect on as you write on this text, if you write on this text, is Bloom's understanding of religion, and also keep in mind very much the use of myth by this text, its name, chapter headings, the sort of substance and structure of each chapter. So that we already heard Bloom in a Catholic church at a service, thinking very pragmatically, but not very theologically or religiously about the service. He's not overwhelmed by the beauty of it all. He's not feeling moved by the Holy Spirit. He's not even thinking in the sort of language of a believer, as they do. Say things like, this is my Protestant idea. It's my relationship to Christ, for example, or I'm filled with the Spirit, as it were. He's sitting in there thinking, Latin dulls the wits a bit, puts people in a receptive set. And then he thinks how, those Catholic priests, they can be, they're often overweight, eating so much food, but then they tell all of these Irish Catholics to have huge families. As it turns out, Stephen Davis's father, Simon, has 15 children, but he's impoverished. How is he going to feed these children? Now, of course, there's a religious idea, the Lord will provide, but Leopold Bloom, as a practical man, thinks, how is that going to work? How is Simon going to feed these people, particularly now with his wife dead? They're in a tough spot. And so he thinks about practicalities, perhaps compared to platitudes, but also compared to this sort of traditional way that somebody thinks in religious language, that there is someone out there, or that there's something out there that will be a positive force in one's own life. Of course, that should always be mitigated against the fact that in these particular religions, there are also dark forces that are very much part of the world. And so we should keep in mind the balance that one's belief system involves. In any case, we see here that Bloom is very much, we already expected not a believer, but is definitely not a believer. This is what he thinks about at the very end of the Hades chapter when thinking about death. And so tell me with your eyes, as it were, whether this would be what you would expect to be a traditional religious belief, or something more like you might hear an agnostic or an atheist interlocutor of yours, perhaps on the quad during a heated exchange, saying, if you are yourself a believer. Bloom's pragmatic perspective on the body: no touching that. Seat of the affections, broken heart. A pump, after all, pumping thousands of gallons of blood every day. One fine day, gets bunged up. There you are. Lots of them lying around here. Is not a graveyard, as it were. Excuse me. Lungs, hearts, livers. We actually seem to have gotten this idea. Right now we're organ donors. Old rusty pumps. Damn the thing else. The resurrection and the life. That's damn the thing else. The resurrection and the life. That's the Catholic notion right there. Once you are dead, you are dead. The last day idea, knocking them all up out of their graves. Come forth Lazarus, who famously came back from the dead, and he came fit and lost the job. Joke. Get up, last day. Then every fellow mousing around for his liver and his lights and the rest of his traps finds damn all of himself that morning. When you are dead, you are dead. It is how he ends up finishing that. Bloom is so practical that he does not have time for the exigencies of religion. He sees religion itself as part of the social fabric that holds Dublin and the world together. He sees it as exercising a function within people's lives, but he does not see it as having the sort of governing power of a transcendent spirit that leads the world in a deterministic way towards a final positive comedic end, as it were. I say comic as opposed to tragic, as having a good end, where, say, people are resurrected, they have perfect bodies, and death leaves the world. It's a very beautiful idea. It is not an idea that Bloom holds, however. That said, moving on to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is the Aeolus chapter. And Aeolus in Homer's Odyssey is the god of winds who lives on a floating island, who has 12 children, 6 men, 6 women who are married to each other. You think, gross, weird. But in Greek and Egyptian mythology, Roman as well, and I think even in Norse, though I don't know it as well, incest is the prerogative of the gods. The gods, since they know no physical bodies, don't have the same prohibitions against incest because they don't have genes. And so they don't need to worry about their children having a higher risk for Down syndrome in the same way that, say, humans do. That said, Aeolus is a minor god, but he holds the 4 winds of the Greek mythological world according to his control, and works as something of an underthing to Poseidon, the great god of the seas for the Greeks. Odysseus visits this Aeolus for a month, tells him his story, and then Aeolus promises to give him a great gift. Though Poseidon is angry at Odysseus and keeping him from returning home because Odysseus had blinded the eye of his Cyclops son and was cursed by the Cyclops. And Poseidon is now guaranteeing that curse on behalf of his son. Aeolus is moved by Odysseus's plight. He puts 3 of the 4 winds into a large bag and leaves the west wind to blow Odysseus to Ithaca. Without the presence of the other 3 major winds, storms cannot be created. The great fearmongers or bugbears of the seafaring people, an early seafaring people, as it were. And so Odysseus comes to within sight of Ithaca. You can see it. You can see the fires that they have for making food. You can smell it. But in the last days before getting to Ithaca, so strong was his desire to make it home, he stays up for 2 straight days. And so once he sees Ithaca, he's practically home. And so he falls asleep, lets himself slip, as it were. The men on his ship think, this Odysseus, pretty clever, cunning man, has this giant bag that told us not to open that he received from a king. It's probably full of jewels, jewels that we think once we get home, he will try to deny to us using his wives. Why don't we just open this bag that he told us not to open and see what's within? They do. The winds blow out, something like a tornado comes out all at once, blows the ship all the way back to Aeolus. When Odysseus approaches him for a second time for aid, Aeolus calls him a cursed man and denies him entrance and exiles him from his island. This mythological episode is now here tethered to a visit to the 2 local newspapers in Ireland, the Evening Telegraph and the Freeman's Journal, edited by Miles Crawford, who himself is considered something of what we call a blowhard or a windbag, someone who blusters, who speaks with emotion and strength, but doesn't always have much to say, as it were. In any case, this chapter takes place at 12 p.m. Remember, this is 4 hours before Blazes Boylan is going to meet Molly at her home to discuss music, as it were, in their upcoming tour. This takes place, like I said, in the Freeman's Journal, the Evening Telegraph, edited by Miles Crawford, who is red-faced from heavy drinking and blustering. Begone, says Crawford to Bloom a third of the way into the chapter. This is a chapter in which we see both Stephen and Bloom. Bloom is, again, working with these 2 journals and with newspapers, and Miles Crawford, because he is an advertising agent, and he is working with a local locksmith named Alexander Keyes to try and get the appropriate price for an advertisement for this Keyes individual in the local newspapers. But in his negotiating, he is being blustered at by Miles Crawford, who tells him to get out, and then later Bloom will call, and he tells him to kiss his royal arse, as it were. You can see the bluster in Miles Crawford. He's very much like, if you're a Spider-Man fan, he seems to be the archetype on which Spider-Man's boss at his newspaper is based. You know, always has a cigar in his mouth, always screaming, looks like he clearly has a cholesterol level that will lead to a heart attack in the next 10 minutes or something like that. In any case, Bloom says that Keyes will renew his ad for 2 months with a simple tough piece paragraph. Crawford blows Bloom away by telling him he can kiss his royal Irish arse, as I said. And so after chapters 1 to 3 and 4 to 6, this chapter features both Bloom and Stephen prominently. It's the first to do that. Bloom is coming east to do his job, and Stephen has just gotten off the tram from Dalkey, which has brought him 7 miles from Sandy Mount Strand back to the heart of the Hibernian metropolis. That is a Roman name or a Roman way of addressing Ireland, Hibernia, rather than Ireland, our land, as it were. In any case, while Stephen is done working for the day, remember his day ended at 10 a.m., his teaching responsibilities, he must deliver Mr. Deasy's hoof and mouth letter to the editor of the Telegraph. And he will do that. He both to the Telegraph and to the Freeman's Journal. And so keep in mind that this is, again, something like a subjugation of Stephen. Perhaps I just want to take a second to mention this to you. Keep in mind that the things one does during the course of the day, we have sort of a Freudian expression. People say, look around on New Year's Eve. Whoever you see around you and wherever you are is where you're going to be the very next year. Sort of a horrifying thing to hear, but it's the same thing with sort of personal habits and how one conducts a day. Things that Stephen spends his day doing are the things that he tends to do almost every day. What does he wish to be? He wants to be a writer, a novelist, somebody who writes fiction for work. But how does he spend his day? Does he sit down to write? Ever? Spends his day teaching, palling around with his friends. He starts drinking in this chapter. He has 3 whiskeys and he will continue to drink until the wee hours of the morning. He's got quite the taste for it. And he's also here doing low-level literary work where he, as a messenger or a courier, takes the words of others and gives them to other people who publish them. This is itself not exactly the trajectory that he wants to be on. But I say this as a warning or admonition to you that time runs out. So whatever it is you wish to achieve, whoever it is you want to be, whatever it is you want to be, you need to devote the appropriate amount of time to it and not let those around you steal your substance, steal your time from you, so that you do not become what you wish to be, or you do not accomplish what you set out to accomplish. You're now starting to see the connection between Aeolus and Stephen here. That it was Odysseus' crew members that steal his completed journey from him in this moment and trying to open this bag. They take his time, additional time from him and energy, in the same way that these friends of, or comrades at the very, perhaps at best, of Stephen, though they're smiling at him and engaging with him, are they stealing his substance from him? Obviously, he has no money to take from him. So what is it that is most valuable to a young person developing? Well, you surely have this sense too. You don't have as many resources as you will have when you were established in 20 years. You might own a home, car or two, have a family. But right now, what you have is time. You have energy. You hopefully have motivation as well. There are things, substances, and people, and institutions and jobs that will take those things from you over time, that will have their effect over time. And so Stephen is right in the mix of it. We, with dramatic irony, can see this. Can he see through all of this himself? Can you see through to all of the distractions and things that set you off course during any given day? Very difficult to see outside of oneself, as it were. See absolutely. We talked a little bit about how that was the 19th century German philosophical dream, to be able to see with a universal perspective, rather than just a strong subjective. In any case, chapter 8, it's called the Laestrygonians. And the Laestrygonians in Homer's Odyssey is something of a horrifying scene. It doesn't get top billing in the same way that the Cyclops episode often does, but there is a ton more depth. What do I mean? In the Cyclops episode, which we will get to either at the end of today, though far more likely in the middle of Wednesday, a single Cyclops traps Odysseus and several of his crew members in a cave where he then viciously grabs 6 of Odysseus' men over the course of 3 meals by their feet and dashes their heads like rabbits, again, or small dogs, is terrible, but how it's done against rocks. Sort of thing that if you know people who work in the countryside and work with animals that get butchered, sorts of things they know. For example, you might know how like rabbits are killed by whiplashing them, essentially. It sounds very brutal, and it is very brutal to we city slickers, but we, and so far as we meet, should know that we are part of a brutal process of nature, as uncomfortable as it is to sort of understand that. It is part of, say, our natures. And of course, vegetarians and vegans often take that very much to heart. And also certain religions like Hinduism as well as Buddhism take that very seriously. Particularly with their notions of reincarnation. What happens to meat that is shared between 2 people? Ugly question, but a legitimate question. If people and creatures are going to get their bodies back, who, if my meat is in another creature and is giving them strength, do they get my body? Do I get my body? These are tough theological questions. In fact, Thomas Aquinas in the Christian tradition writes a part of his Summa Theologiae on that. In any case, cannibalism. Though the Cyclops is sort of a different species from human, it's really a giant human with a single round eye. That's what Cyclops means, round eye. Kuklos, like cycle, is the word we get it from, in ops like optics, or ophthalmologist, a doctor of eye studies. So that is, he also cooks Odysseus's men in an enclosed space. Odysseus has to smell that, becomes enraged by this. It's a very powerful episode. The Laestrygonians, much shorter episode, but like I said, much more depth. What do I mean? Odysseus comes to a city called Tlephalos. He at this time has 12 ships, and 11 of the ships park or moor themselves in the harbor. Odysseus, in a way that if you've read the Odyssey, or if you do read the Odyssey, you will see he often does things a little bit distinctly for himself. He actually has his ship moored just outside of the harbor. He sends 2 people to the city. There's a young girl that is met, who then takes these men to the citadel of Tlephalos, where a giant woman, they see then a giant woman, who then screams at them, sort of a creepy Donald Sutherland taken over by aliens way. If you've ever seen Revenge of the Body Snatchers, and more of a 70s phenomenon with communism around and ideas about that. We can talk about what zombies often represent during seminar. But then a giant man comes out and gobbles up these 2 individuals. The Laestrygonians are then summoned. They are a race of cannibal giants, and they take giant stones and they throw them at Odysseus's ships, destroying 11 out of 12 of them. There's something like 60 to 80 people on each of Odysseus's ships, so he loses 11/12 of his men, something like 600 or 700 people, all in one clip. So something we know about this chapter, at the very least, is that it's going to involve eating, but also potentially cannibals. So where is it set? Interesting. It is set in various bars, like the Ormond Hotel, places of eating, as well. Also the Burton and J.D. Burns's Moral Pub. So let's talk a little bit about this. Here we observe Bloom's eating habits and his observations and judgments of the eating habits of others. Bloom prefers clean eaters and himself enjoys wine, a little bit more sophisticated than beer and much weaker than, say, whiskey, like what Stephen is drinking. Stephen is drinking to get drunk. Bloom is drinking to dine. You understand that there's a difference between eating and dining. Perhaps you don't appreciate the distinction as much, but you have observed it before. You go to a nice place, perhaps it's very nice and the waiter wears gloves, maybe our server is what we call these people these days. They come in from the left. This is what they're supposed to do. If there's a 4 or 5 star place, they put the napkin on your lap. You want some wine? What do they do first? Who's had a very nice meal where wine is offered to them? Do they just pour it all in your cup? In a very nice place, they give you a little to sample, swish it around, you drink, and you're like, this is good. You may continue to pour. This is dining as opposed to simply eating. And this sort of thing that, traditionally speaking, people consider to say a really nice evening out, perhaps a very nice dinner with somebody. That said, you should keep in mind that dining doesn't mean that food tastes better. Like Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, Taco Bell, sometimes it doesn't get a lot better tasting than that. But it's a different sort of experience. It is more of an artistic experience. And if you want to find a reason to eat fine foods, here is the reason, intellectually speaking. It takes much more preparation, skill, and often rarer ingredients that are more difficult to cook with in order to make fine dishes. So even if they don't taste as good as, say, a Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich, few things in the world do, the amount of skill and effort it takes to make certain dishes justifies the experience. You could probably make something similar to a Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich, even if it wasn't quite as good, but making something like a delicious ratatouille or a foie gras or really having the perfect cut of Chateaubriand. It takes tremendous skill to pull off these sorts of cooking or chef endeavors. And so Bloom is somebody who appreciates these sorts of things. As we know from his introduction in chapter 4, he likes to eat. He is like Odysseus, but like Odysseus, he has a certain way of eating. He's not a messy eater. He doesn't eat with his hands. He doesn't over-consume either food, nor does he over-consume wine. Because keep in mind that it's not so much the food that's the problem of the people around Bloom and Stephen's problem. It's the drink. Gluttony refers not only to eating too much food, but to drinking too much as well. And so you notice that there's a fastidiousness to Bloom. There is a moderation to him that is not shared by those around him. And keep this in mind. How can you observe the moderation of those around you? Can you observe the virtues of those around you? Can you see whether somebody is just or temperate or wise? You can't physically see. There might be physical evidence of somebody, right? Being very moderate, perhaps they're very put together or something like that. But the evidence comes through the result of their actions over time, right? See that somebody is wise when you put together, you did this and this and this and this, and then something really worked out for you. Really smart. Or you did this for this person? I would have never. That person's very fair. Or you think, you sit down to eat with somebody, they take out their own napkin, put it on, and they sit and they wait, even though your dish has been brought to you. You're like, oh, I had no idea you were such a polite diner, as it were. So again, there's something that sets Bloom as different from those around him. It's a virtue, but again, it's one of the sorts of virtues that might just be seen as an oddity by those who do not share it. Why are you so persnickety? Why just some wine? Have some whiskey with the boys, Bloom, for God's sake. Why don't you just hang out? And, this is perhaps the sort of rhetorical reasoning you have yourself confronted on weekend nights if you wanted to study and your friends like Buck Mulligan did not wish to. In any case, Bloom also sees Dilly Dedalus and thinks she must be selling furniture. This is a sad moment. Stephen will also see Dilly later with her French primer and think about drowning. The fact that she's drowning and that she is like the drowning man that he cannot save because he cannot even save himself because he is a poor swimmer. And in this metaphor, the poor swimmer he economically has just received something like 4 sovereigns, but owes something like 30 sovereigns around town. Even though he's made some money, he hasn't even made enough money to cover his debts for the next 6 months. And so he can't even help himself. He's just given up his key to his own home and is looking during the course of the day when he's not drinking for somewhere to stay. He's at Sally's, decides against there. Leopold Bloom's, doesn't stay there. And so this is a moment that I think, particularly with young people, but if anybody who is impoverished or lacks the power that they think they might justly be able to wield, might run into. He would love to help his sister. What can he do? He doesn't have anything. He's not in a position to help anybody. Bloom is. Bloom's put money away. Bloom has a career, an easy career too. And he continues to make money from investments too. Bloom can actually help people but can he help himself? Maybe the question that we have. Stephen has to live with the reality that the choices that he's made so far have put him in a position that he cannot help even somebody that he loves. And you might imagine that's a really, what's a worse feeling than that? Exactly. And a rational understanding, by the way, too. It's not like, well, anybody can help somebody. It's, she needs money. I don't have money. And I need money. I need to help myself before I can even help her. It's very much if you've ridden on a plane recently, that you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then put it on your child or the people around you who are fumbling for it. Stephen has not put the oxygen mask on himself. And perhaps that's a reason to maybe consider becoming somebody of substance yourself. If you wish to help others, at least the case that we seem to be seeing here is you must first learn to help yourself, so that you are in a position to do that. So perhaps don't trust the various psychologists that you meet in your dorms right now. I don't mean the ones that are professional. I mean the ones that are aspiring, of course. In any case, he also interacts Bloom with Joseph Howe, a former girlfriend of his, who is now a Mrs. Breen. They speak about one Mina Purefoy, who was a woman who has been in labor for 3 days. 3 days because her child's head, and this is something that afflicts a lot of women, is too big. It's actually something that afflicted me, and I was a cesarean section, and then named Alexander for it. And Caesar and Alexander are connected with Plutarch. In any case, Bloom, we mentioned that he cares about others and is actually capable of helping others. He's working for this Alexander Pease. We see that he works to try and help Patty Dingham's widow. Later, we will see him visit the maternity ward for Mina Purefoy. Is this man the stereotype that he is perceived as? Is he someone who is just out for himself? Is he simply money grubbing? Why does he wish to help these people? What is in it for him to visit Mina Purefoy? What he says is, oh gosh, that's horrible. That must be terrible for her when he hears that she's hurt. What is in it for him when he takes Stephen Dedalus back to his home? I will suggest that there's something potentially for him there. But I think you, as the reader of Bloom, start to see that this is a good, make your own judgments, but a good-hearted person, somebody that tries to look out for others in a city of people who are talkers and drink and are just looking out for where the next pleasure is going to come from them, while also he has to sit with the weight of his father's suicide, his son's death, his daughter's soon deflowering, which is something that he does fear, and with good cause, because she's getting rather close to that happening, as again we hear during the Nighttown episode. And so our perception of Bloom should be going at a tangent from the perception that many of those around him hold. And keep this in mind. These are all things that can be seen about Bloom. And yet the people around him who are supposed to be his friends, they don't see any of this at all. So when you think yourself about who you are, what you are, your own identity, I think the expectation should not be that those around you know your substance, know your worth, know your qualities. You have to know you. You need to be you, regardless of what those around you think, and that perhaps the reward is a much simpler, humbler reward. Not that everyone around you wants to shake your hand, as David Goggins says, stop acting like everybody needs to give you a pat on the back, as it were. And I think that's really interesting advice, because I think we often feel like we deserve a pat on the back for whatever it's, to be consoled or to be celebrated. But the reward might just be that you get to actually be what you are. That Bloom is different from those around him. He is not a wisher. He's a person of I've said this word too many times, but a person of substance, a person of value, the sort of person you would want to be your neighbor. And yet he is often pictured as the sort of person who is the opposite of the ideal neighbor, the part of this Jewish Hungarian immigration that is taking over the islands. This does not seem to be what Bloom is doing at all. And so, what is the cannibalism of this chapter? This is the way that the Irish cannibalize themselves. That even a valuable person that is also a citizen, born in their own midst, they might not see the true value of, that they might try and consume and oppress. One wonders. In any case, but we get a little bit more insight into Bloom and Molly's romantic life here. And something I don't know that I've mentioned, but I should mention, is that part of the genius of this text, as one of the great critics of Ulysses, Hugh Kenner, says, is that the reader only learns things as the characters think about them or experience them themselves. There are only a couple times where we have a narrator, and then we also have a second narrator at one point in this text that sort of objectively tells us things. Most of the time, we're left to catch the clues through the thoughts and actions of our characters. For example, Molly's impending affair returns to the forefront of Bloom's thoughts as he remembers an evening just over 2 weeks ago when the three of them, Bloom, Molly, and Boylan, walked together after a performance. Subtle stroking hands, Boylan and Molly made clear their reciprocal interest in each other, and Bloom noticed. I quote, "The other side of her, elbow, arm, touch, fingers, answer. Yes, it's an ugly, ugly moment. I don't know if you've ever been with somebody, romantically speaking, and then had a competitor, an obvious competitor that you knew about, but you're all three walking together, and the object of your desire in the middle. Married in the case of Bloom, so perhaps a little heavier than you're even accustomed to. And what are Boylan and Molly doing? They're trailing their hands so they can touch each other. And Bloom sees this. Does she move her hand away? Oh, no, she leaves it there. And so now, having seen the letter from Boylan, and remembering 2 weeks ago, it's all too clear to Bloom what's going on. This has been developing over time. That this is not the beginning of something. It is the beginning of the consummation of the affair. The affair has been developing underneath his nose for some time here. In any case, he spies Bob Doran bobbing through the street on a bender, that's a drinking bender, then returns to his thought that he was happier then. Harkening back to the previous decade, the era prior to the loss of Rudy, thinks could never like it again after Rudy. What couldn't he like again? The act of copulating with his wife because of what it might produce. Another son might then die on him, which according to old Jewish belief is the father's fault. So he killed his own son, is one way of thinking about how he thinks every day about his own personal responsibility related to the person for whom he was supposed to protect, right? Hinting towards what we will learn about the Bloom marriage in the Ithaca episode. There's been a period of 10 years, 5 months, and 15 or 18 days during which carnal intercourse has been incomplete. In any case, after seeing the disgusting evening in the Burton, Bloom turns to Davy Burns' so-called moral pub. There he meets Nosy Flynn and orders a gorgonzola cheese sandwich and a glass of burgundy. Notice that there's a sort of Christian element there. He takes the bread and the blood, or the body and the blood, which is a wafer is a piece of bread. Of course, it gets transformed during the Catholic Mass, and it's a symbol of transformation in the Protestant Mass. And there's also wine that's turned into blood. It was actually Carlo Rossi at Marquette. In any case, Nosy Flynn then says, "Oh, your wife, she's going on a tour. Who's getting it up?" That language is very sexually suggestive, given the fact that Bloom knows that his wife is going to cheat on him. Who's getting it up? It's vulgar, but boom, it hits him like an ice pick in the heart. And it says that he feels that he inhales mustard in just a quick moment of affect, the psychologist would call it. In any case, Bloom gives a response to that. He resolves to check on the anatomical accuracy of the statues of the goddesses at the National Gallery. He will actually look at the mesial groove, that's the butt crack of Venus, who will be called Venus Calligraphy by Buck Mulligan, who will actually, in his sort of mischievous way, catch Bloom doing this and call him Greeker than the Greeks because of him looking at butts and various notions present then and now about the homosexuality of Greek men. In any case, this concludes with Bloom avoiding running into his problem, which is Blazes Boylan. That's all I've got for today. Finishing this up on Wednesday.